A federal judge blocks a new state constitutional amendment from getting certified. The judge granted a 14-day temporary restraining order against State Question 755. This is the one that deals with international law. It prohibits state courts from being forced to consider international or Shariah law when deciding a case. The amendment's authors were not happy with the judge's order or with the fact that the state didn't even file a response brief with the court ahead of yesterday's hearing.
You've got to get something on file if you're going to be heard in court. I'm an attorney, Representative Duncan's an attorney, and you've got to suit up and show up before the game starts.
And the plaintiff, the executive director of the Council on American-Islamic Relations, says that he is happy that the judge is seeing the merits of his argument. We are also getting reports that there has been a lot of hate mail across the state at mosques due to what's being called backlash of 755 and this temporary restraining order. We know the order will end November 22nd. We are going to go to the newsroom now. Joining me this morning with more about the case and what happens as we move forward is Munir Awad, the executive director of CAIR. Mr. Awad, thanks for joining us here on News 9 this morning.
Thank you for having me.
Well, let's just first get your reaction to the judge's restriction for 14 days on 755.
Well, we're definitely satisfied. Our intention was to prevent this from becoming effective in our Constitution in order for the courts to consider whether it's constitutional or not. We believe it's unconstitutional, and we're glad that we're going to have a day in court in order to prove that.
What do you think? Did you talk with any lawmakers before this? I think the frustration here with Oklahoma voters is Oklahoma voters overwhelmingly say, no, we don't want this. Now we vote on it. We pay for this election. Now it has to go to the court. Now we have to pay for court. Now we have to do another election. Do you see some of the frustration just even with being a voter and then your vote kind of doesn't count?
Right. Absolutely. But I think this is what the politicians that put this on the ballot expected and wanted.
Did you talk with any lawmakers before this, giving them a red flag saying, hey, we're going to file a lawsuit if this passes?
Well, we definitely weren't threatening with a lawsuit, but we were reaching out to Oklahomans. We were going out on many speaking engagements, reaching out to the interfaith community, reaching out to universities. We definitely went out and talked about this, but just the rhetoric of Senator Sykes and Rex Duncan shows you neither of these people are willing to sit down and speak with any Muslim, let alone the Muslim community, to speak about concerns with respect to this. Much of their rhetoric is anti-Islamic. They have these deep ingrained stereotypes that are ill-informed and in many ways ignorant about the Muslim community.
Well, let me ask you about that, because do you feel if this law that we voted on and approved, Oklahomans approved, if it would have been more vague in a religious tone, incorporating a Christian, Jewish, or other faiths and the Islamic Sharia law, that you would not have had a problem with it?
Well, no, I think there's a red flag should come up anytime we have our legislatures and our government trying to regulate our religion. Islam is the only faith mentioned in this law. So I'm not saying if they would have thrown in another religion, I would have backed off, but we should not have the state governing and defining what our religion is.
Well,
and that's the problem with this.
There are laws in America that we go by, and, a Mormon doesn't say, well, the Book of Mormon is in favor of polygamy, so we're going to introduce that into court. Why do you feel the Muslim community believes it should have favored status then in the courts?
Well, it's not favored status. Just a side note.
I think that's what people might feel that it looks like.
Well, let me explain it then. Well, polygamy is also allowed in Islam as well, and Muslims aren't allowed to engage in polygamy in America. Muslims live abiding to the law of the land. Muslims are not breaking the law. The aspects of Sharia and Islam that would be allowed to be practiced in the United States and allowed to be considered in a court of law are in accordance to the United States law, are in accordance to the Constitution, the state Constitution. There are many people that are allowed to have religious ideas and practices considered in a court of law in order for a judge to come upon a final ruling, whether it be about domestic issues, family law, and Muslims are being precluded from doing that. Muslims are being isolated and targeted as the only faith community that won't be allowed to do that in Oklahoma.
I know there was a case in New Jersey where a Muslim asked that Sharia law be used in a case where there was allegations of rape with his wife. And I think when you talk with Oklahomans, I think that that's what they, don't want that in. That's what people are saying, is this is really, not anything dealing with hate, but they just don't want that forced on our courts.
Well, this is another aspect of the misinformation that's been passed on. The thing people don't bring up is, one, this is absolutely the single only case where anyone can bring up where Sharia came up in a court in the United States. But second, it's the case was overturned and reversed. And anyone that knows anything about common law in the United States knows that a case that's overturned is in fact not a precedent. So this case actually serves an example of how Sharia can never conflict and replace with the law of our land. The appellate court said it was wrong, it was a mistake, and it would never happen. And just to be clear for Oklahomans, any foreign law, any religious law, no matter from what religion, can never, it's legally impossible for that law to replace and conflict with the laws of our land. So what we're basically asking is, why are the aspects of Islam and Sharia that are compliant with U.S. law, why are those being precluded and forbidden from being considered in a court of law?
I understand what you're saying. Let me ask you, too, because I think on a serious note here, too, with this story, what we're hearing, and we have received these copies of these letters that mosques around the state are getting backlash of this hate mail, and they're very vulgar in nature. What are you turning over to the authorities, and are they investigating?
Yes, personally, my office, we've got it ever since I've came in, but the issue happened after filing the lawsuit. With respect to the state question, it's been the fact that our community in general is getting it now. Islamic centers have been getting hate mail. In one case, there's been a video that was sent to an Islamic center showing things getting blown up and images of weapons. And the problem is we have to see that the supporters of this amendment that are leading the push in our politicians, the rhetoric that they are spreading, that Oklahomans should fear Islam, that there's this looming threat of Islam coming to take over Oklahoma, they have to be held accountable for words and rhetoric like that, because what they're doing is they're stoking the fears of Oklahomans.
Well,
and I'm not saying they're inciting Oklahomans to act, but
even last week when, or a week ago, when Juan Williams, the NPR reporter, who basically said his personal thought about his words were that it puts a little fear in him if he gets on an airplane and there's someone, you feel that Muslims are being stigmatized, but does it surprise you in the wake of 9/11 where there was extreme Islamic extremists? How do you calm those fears, I guess, is what I'm trying to ask you.
Well, it's through outreach and a lot of work that CAIR does. I mean, over 95% of the work that CAIR does is about outreach. We do interfaith work. We go out and speak to churches. We go out and speak to schools. We go out and we do community service. The thing is, a lot of people are not exposed to Islam or Muslims by meeting their neighbors or meeting people in their community or meeting the people that are contributing in charitable ways. They're learning about Islam from the media and learning about it from Rex Duncan and Senator Sykes, and that's the danger right there, because they're not saying that they're nervous of Muslims. Senator Sykes and Rex Duncan are literally saying they're afraid of Muslims, that there's a fear that Oklahomans should have about Muslims, and that's why we need to stand up and let these representatives know they should be held accountable for their words.
Well, we appreciate, Mr. Awad, you coming in and just discussing that with us this morning.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thanks so much for joining us here on News 9. We do want to remember that in 2 weeks, this case will be back in front of the judge, so we'll let you know what happens with this temporary restraining order that now will be in front of her back in 2 weeks.